All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the morning session, Zero Waste Youth Activism. My name is Caleb Gordon. I'm a planning committee member for Zero Waste Youth, and I would like to introduce the presenters. Each presenter is going to get about 10 minutes to present, and then we'll have a little bit of time left over at the end for Q&A. So if you have any questions for a presenter, I'd like you to save all the questions for the end, but you're welcome to submit them in the chat. If you have them, throughout the presentation, and then we'll ask those at the end. All right, so starting off, we have Amber Chen, founder of Anti-Racist Planet, Plastic Pollution Coalition Youth Ambassador, and she's a senior at South Pasadena High School. Okay, Amber, take it away.
Hey. Hi everyone. My name is Amber. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently zooming in from Saturday school because I've been late to class. This is my presentation on environmental justice focus for youth activists. Thanks. So a little background. I got started in youth activism my freshman year of high school, when I was speaking at a minimum wage city council meeting, and one of the people speaking there was a woman who was the chair of my city's Natural Resources and Environmental Commission. So I ended up following her out and like getting her contact information, and I became their youth commissioner. So that's the climate strike I led my sophomore year of high school for kids who couldn't make it to the one in downtown Los Angeles. And later, this summer, actually, I partnered with the Arlington Garden in Pasadena, to host a series of community led, high school led plastics education classes for elementary age kids. And so these are some pictures from that. I don't know why that one's blurred. And yeah, so basically, as a part of the activism I was doing, with plastics over the summer, I had the opportunity to table at a Juneteenth event. And at the event, on my way there, I asked, one of the lead activists who was my advisor how I should go about talking, about the toxic impacts of plastic, how plastic can negatively affect human reproductive health, and lead to, higher mortality rates or stuff like infertility. And she told me that she didn't think it was necessary for me to talk about these things because overpopulation is a problem. People should just die anyway. Um, and I thought she was like joking at first, but she wasn't joking. It was completely serious. Um, and I don't think she realized it at the time, but in saying that, it was an example of eco-fascist rhetoric because the people who are closest to the production of plastic, the consumption of plastic, and the afterlife of plastic are people of color because of these structures of racism. So I began to dive deeper into environmental justice, which, as defined right here, is the meaningful involvement of all people regardless of race, color, national origin, or income with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. I went on sort of this rabbit hole of the writings of Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Hop Hopkins and Dorceta Taylor and Robert Bullard, all these like major figureheads within the environmental justice movement. And I realized that not only was climate change exacerbating existing inequalities like racism and patriarchy and economic inequality, it is also caused by these same structures. Therefore, if our movement isn't intersectional and inclusive, it's not going to be successful because then we're not going to target, all of these existing inequalities that culminate in, the impacts of climate change. Um, but this is like in contrast to the way the environmental movement looks like now, which is largely white, and not very inclusive. I'd been in the movement long enough to, once I started researching environmental justice, I was able to identify a pattern in the interactions I'd had with the majority white activists around me, in which they'd said stuff along the lines of, oh, it's okay, if diversity is not really a thing because we're all fighting for a healthy planet anyway, which is to the benefit of us all. But policy becomes really narrow, when people aren't represented. And so this is something I really wanted to do something about. Yeah, so basically, sacrifice zones again is the manifestation of environmental justice, really. They're places where people of color are disproportionately located in pollution hotspots, and it's like the existence of sacrifice zones that really fuels climate change. Okay, so I wanted to do something about environmental justice because, and specifically about sacrifice zones, I really wanted to work on those inequalities, but um, because I also noticed that a lot of environmental services and opportunities and nonprofits were very much centered in affluent areas, and they would often stay there, like composting services, zero waste stores, etc., and community gardens. They are all like concentrated in wealthy areas, and doing so has the tendency to, make inequality worse when we don't focus also on marginalized communities. But also, as someone who lives in an affluent area, I didn't want to like insert myself into an underprivileged area just because that would be an example of white saviorism. So I had to be really careful about like how I was going to use my privilege to the benefit of helping people in sacrifice zones and mitigating those inequalities in regards to climate change. Um, so what I realized was that like with privilege, the reason why people in privileged areas have the opportunity to create all of these environmental services is because they have time, and because they have resources. And so I have time and I have resources. So I thought that the best way for me to use my time and resources would be to empower people in underprivileged areas. And, as someone who really likes writing, I thought that the best way to do that would be through usage of the media. So taking my love of writing and the time I have to spotlight sacrifice zones into something digestible. And so this was like a preliminary sketch for like a project that would later become Anti-Racist Planet. Yeah, so then I started Anti-Racist Planet, which really combined sort of the ability to take privilege and utilize that in a media environment. And um, I think people often underestimate the power of media, and especially the power of youth when it comes to media. I recall an interview Jamie Margolin gave a while ago in which she talked about how, although the youth don't have a lot of political power in regards to voting, etc., the youth do have a lot of power in shifting the culture, and what controls the culture is the media. And so Anti-Racist Planet was sort of combining that media aspect and my privilege. And so it's basically an initiative to really spotlight the people in sacrifice zones, because I think that it's astounding that a lot of people in the environmental movement don't know the names of people that have already died at the hands of climate change, who are a large majority low income people, people of color. And then also it's to spread information about sacrifice zones and environmental justice and the racist roots of climate change, um, to sort of shift that culture using media. And also, this is my last slide, but a philosophy in regards to youth activism that I really started to embrace as I like put a foot into environmental justice is the idea that this is a renaissance. Because I think, in the current structures we operate in, everything has a tendency to become competitive. And I see like activism becoming competitive, especially in my high school, which is one of those, like, competitive public high schools, where kids are doing community service hour competitions. It's really bizarre. It's almost dystopic. And I think that a better way to think about youth activism and activism in general is as a renaissance that we're all contributing to, rather than something that has to be competed for, because that's contradictory to the collectivism we're trying to achieve. Thank you. That's it.
Thanks so much, Amber. Great presentation. All right. So next up we have Devin Bradley. Devin is the president of Miramonte Environmental Club, Recyclesmart and a Recyclesmart Intern.
All right, so hi everyone, my name is Devin and I'm a senior at Miramonte High School in Orinda, California. I'm president of my school's environmental club and also an intern for Recyclesmart. So 2 years ago, I founded my school's environmental solutions club with a mission of reducing plastic waste in restaurant takeout. Now, I don't want to delve too deep into the complexities of the plastic waste issue, but the overall problem with single-use plastic in restaurant takeout is that it contributes to both plastic pollution and climate change. And I'm sure you've all seen these images of these massive garbage patches floating in the ocean. And seeing these images really impacted me. And especially after I learned that a large percentage of this plastic waste was single-use beverage and food containers. So seeing these images really inspired me to take action. So with the environmental club that I formed, we worked with local restaurant owners to find ways to reduce the use of plastic in takeout. So that meant encouraging restaurant owners to use or supply utensils only upon request, and also advocating for them to use more sustainable takeout ware like compostable containers and paper bags. However, things got a little bit difficult during the pandemic as restaurants entered difficult financial times. So many restaurants were struggling to stay open, much less afford the new, more expensive compostable supplies that we are advocating for them to use. At the same time, however, plastic waste was a greater concern than ever, as restaurants were forced to conduct their business solely through takeout due to the pandemic restrictions. So plastic waste was increasing through takeout. So I founded Project Heart, which stands for Help the Environment, Assist Restaurant Takeout to respond to these factors. So the objective of the project was to help local restaurants during the pandemic while simultaneously promoting sustainability through the donation of compostable takeout supplies. So the way the project worked is that I contacted local restaurant owners to figure out what supplies they needed. And once I learned about the supplies they needed, I would order the supplies off Webstront, which is basically a website that is geared toward restaurants that sells compostable supplies in bulk. And then once the supplies arrived, I coordinated with my environmental club to deliver these supplies to local restaurants. And then the greatest challenge in this project was fundraising, as during the pandemic, it wasn't really possible to use the traditional methods of fundraising like selling baked goods. I mean, for one thing, selling baked goods would probably not be safe from a health standpoint during the pandemic. And then also selling pastries in the middle of the Orinda would be competing with the local restaurants that we were trying to help. So the primary method we employed to raise money was reaching out to local news outlets to get them to feature our story in their paper. So we reached out to the Orinda News, La Orinda Weekly, and Recyclesmart to get them to publicize what we're doing in their newsletters and let the community know about what we're doing. And we created a GoFundMe. That way people could donate directly to our project and our efforts. And by the time the pandemic ended, by the time pandemic restrictions relaxed and restaurants were able to return to in-person dining, we had raised over $1,100, which went to the donation of 3,000 recycled paper bags, 1,400 compostable sugarcane bagasse containers, and 400 compostable cup holders. And then it was through this project that I became aware of the widespread use of polystyrene takeout containers among local restaurants. Now, in case you didn't know, polystyrene or styrofoam is the worst single-use plastic. In most places, it's not recyclable, which means that it either ends up in the landfill or in the ocean to the detriment of marine wildlife. And this fact is especially bad in terms of restaurant takeout, as these takeout containers often have a lot of leftover food in them. And when they go to the landfill, this food is buried beneath lots of landfill and can't get access to air. Therefore, it decomposes anaerobically, which produces methane, and that's a greenhouse gas that is 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide at trapping heat. And along with these environmental impacts, I also learned about several health impacts, such as the fact that when polystyrene is exposed to heat, it can leach the chemical known as styrene, which has been identified as a possible human carcinogen by the EPA. So after learning about these environmental and health impacts of polystyrene, I decided to take action. And the first thing I did was conduct more research. I I wanted to know more about the impacts of polystyrene and also the current regulations of polystyrene in nearby cities, just to get an idea of like the precedents, an idea for what like a ban could look like. And also through my Recyclesmart internship, I was able to get in contact with someone who helped implement a plastic ban in Alameda. And she explained to me how I could advocate for a ban during the public forum session of at my local city council. So she gave me the idea to go to my city council and lobby for action. So I enlisted the help of several really good public speakers from my environmental club. And we went and just spoke during a public forum session and talked about why polystyrene was bad and why we thought there should be a ban. And fortunately, the city council is really receptive of our project, and the mayor in particular really liked our idea. So she met with us separately and explained to us how the entire process would work and how we could get an ordinance for Orinda. And so the first thing she did was put our ordinance on the agenda as an action item for the city council to vote on. And once the city council voted on this action item, we were able to talk about the ordinance during formal city council time and start getting to work on the formal details of like the ordinance. And the entire process took about 7 months from the beginning of this year in January to July, but our persistence paid off as the ordinance adopted the ban in July and it went into effect this past August. And then the final project I want to talk about as part of my Recyclesmart internship was a volunteer bin monitoring system at my school. So as a Recyclesmart intern, my job was to help coordinate waste reduction programs at my school and also help my administration fulfill several state mandates on proper waste sorting. So in the volunteer bin monitoring system that I developed, volunteers could sign up for shifts during lunch to advise students on the proper disposal of waste. And I created this infographic in the middle where to help guide volunteers on the correct bins to dispose of trash. And the purpose of this project was to divert waste from the landfill and also prevent the contamination of recycling and compost by items that shouldn't go in there. And at the same time, the project also helped educate the student body on proper waste disposal and also provided an opportunity for students to earn volunteer hours. And things got a little bit difficult during the pandemic as we were online for the majority of time, but ever since we've come back in person, we've reenacted the program, and so far things are looking pretty good. So now I want to move on to how you can take action. So the first thing you should do is identify an environmental problem at your school and community and think how you could fix it. So for me, my issue was the single-use plastic in restaurant takeout, but it could be anything. So for example, maybe you saw pollution in local streams, or your school doesn't have like enough recycling or compost bins. Once you identify the problem, think about how you could address this issue. And once you think about that, then take action. So in my experience, when it comes to helping the environment, taking action is always better than no action. For example, for my polystyrene ban, we were able to bring change by just going for it. Like we weren't really expecting much, but things were able to work out. And so if your problem could be solved through legislative action, then I encourage you to go to a public forum session at your local city council and talk about the issue. Talk about why it's problematic and talk about why there needs to be a law or a ban regulating whatever issue that you're talking about. If you fail, the environment is not harmed in any way, but if you succeed, the environment benefits immensely. So there's really nothing to lose at all by doing it. And on this topic of grassroots action, I feel like a lot of people believe that the only way we can combat climate change and these other issues is from action at the top. So the president or like the state. And while I don't disagree with this idea, I also believe that action can come from the bottom as well. So for example, if every individual city banned polystyrene, that would be just as effective as banning polystyrene nationwide. So the idea is that, and also what's good about this idea is that you can participate in this action, right? It's not at the top, you can come from the bottom. So I encourage you to go out in your community and just advocate for change and take action. And that's all I have to say. I'm so honored to speak during this panel. And I just remember I attended this Convergence last year, And the speakers there really inspired me to take action. So hopefully I can reciprocate that feeling for you guys. And thank you so much.
All right, Devin. I'm feeling inspired. Thanks so much for your presentation here. That was great. All right, so next up we have Eva Genstanger. Eva is the founder and leader of Plastic Free Gen Z. All right, take it away, Eva.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. My name is Eva, pronouns she, her, and I am the leader of Plastic Free Gen Z. So we are a youth-led plastic pollution awareness campaign based in San Diego, California. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk about our campaign, but not only that, but what we've learned about the reality of recycling, as we like to call it. So to give just a little bit of a background, Plastic Free Gen Z started this year, so we're almost a year old, as Youth for Climate, which is a program of San Diego 350, first youth-led plastic pollution awareness campaign. So from my work with Plastic Free Gen Z, I am now a youth ambassador for the Plastic Pollution Coalition, which is really exciting. And it's just been a really fun journey to lead Plastic Free Gen Z this past year. So we all know that plastic pollution is one of the greatest issues that we are facing as a species and that we probably will ever face. You know, climate change threatens all of our futures and all of our nows, as we like to say. So I'm gonna just start my presentation by asking you all a very simple question that I would love for you guys to answer in the chat. And so this question is, how can we fix the plastic pollution crisis? So this is obviously a very broad question. So I'm not expecting like scientific answers and like long laid out things, but when you think about how to solve the plastic pollution crisis, like what is the first thing that comes in your mind? So if you want to just like pop a word in the chat, like, I don't know, if you think recycling or zero waste choices or anything like that, just put it in the chat. So I'm curious to see. So, you know, when I usually ask this question, I tend to get answers like recycling or having the individual change their zero waste habits. But sometimes, so yeah, I'm seeing that now. So eliminate disposal system society, totally rethinking single-use culture, saying no to single-waste utensils, legislation. And this is completely true. We have to just set a mindset within ourselves and our communities about how single-use is not the answer, right? And legislative action and personal action and awareness completely. So when we think about how we're going to approach a plastic pollution crisis, another thing we really have to think about is its combination to fossil fuels. So this is something that a lot of people tend to do. They think of it as two separate issues, climate change and plastic pollution, and they're really interconnected, and they're all started primarily by the fossil fuel industries. So this leads me to the biggest myth of plastic pollution, which is that in order to combat plastic pollution, we have to just focus all of our energy into recycling and ignore the impact that fossil fuel extraction has on plastic production. So it turns out, as Devin was kind of saying earlier, that a lot of plastics that we use in this world are for single-use packaging. So 40% of the plastics that we are using in the world are for single use. And so single use means literally single use, meaning that they're only used for a short period of time before they're disposed of. And the disposal part is the part that we usually notice, right? Like that's what the media shows. They show us images like this where we see poor sea turtles trapped in plastic or water bottles, and even there's a flip-flop on the floor here. And of course, this is just a drawing, but you all know what I'm talking about. So when we see these images, it really makes us think like this is a problem and we need to deal with our waste better. And so when people think, okay, how do we manage plastic waste? They think recycling, right? Well, today I'd like to kind of talk about how recycling isn't always as great as we think it is as it is in the current form. I'm not saying that recycling could never be a solution. I'm saying that right now, recycling is not doing the kind of things that we think it's doing. So we dispose of about 35 million tons of plastic waste every single year. And of course, the pandemic has not helped in that. And so how do we manage this waste? Well, there tend to be three different ways that plastic waste is handled. We have putting it into a landfill, incinerating it, or recycling it. But these three solutions aren't really helping with managing the plastic pollution crisis. In fact, what they actually do is they usually create more pollution that mostly harms communities of color in poor countries around the world. So we can start with incineration. Burning plastic will release thousands of dangerous chemicals that put the incinerator workers and neighboring communities in great harm. And then we also have landfills, which are always placed, or most often placed near BIPOC and low-income communities. And then of course we have recycling. Only 8.4% of our waste is recycled. Like that is a very small amount. And then not even that, it gets worse. Only about 2% of our plastics are recycled into products with the same level of function. The rest are what's called downcycled. So not very good. And it even gets worse because 62% of the recycling is not even recycled in the US. We literally export it to other countries for them to deal with. It's terrible. So that being said, recycling is often pretty expensive. So the US has put the burden of recycling for several years on poor countries around the world, as pictured here, Indonesia. And so these countries have to bear the brunt. They face serious public health issues due to the presence of this imported plastic pollution. So clearly recycling is not what we think it is. So, you know, if recycling isn't actually doing what we think it's doing, why have we been told since day one that it's the solution to plastic pollution, right? Like I remember an Earth Day at school, an Earth Day, they'd be like, how can you be a better citizen and help the world? And their first thing was like, recycle more. And like, I get it. That's recycling can be a great way to like purpose something that would otherwise be waste. But in the system as it is now, it's not doing what we think it is. And the truth is we need to start pointing our fingers at the fossil fuel industry and less on like individual consumers. Like, this is your fault, you need to recycle more. So what it really comes down to is the connection between plastic and fossil fuels. So almost every single piece of plastic starts as a byproduct of fracking called ethane. So to make plastic, they separate ethane from natural gas and they send it to an ethane cracker, which will break the molecules apart, making ethylene. And then plastics are made in petrochemical facilities using this ethylene. So natural gas is very abundant as a source of energy today, but with growing electrification, yay, the fossil fuel industry is like starting to like transition away from like, using natural gas and all those things. And so what they're doing instead is they're pumping up plastic production. So it's their plan B, right? If we can't make money from fossil fuel use anymore to power cars as much because people are starting to become more interested in electrifying our systems, well, plastic isn't slowing down at all. In fact, it's ramping up. So they love to push the idea that using plastic is okay because we can just recycle it and that's fine. So the more we frack and drill for fossil fuels and the more plastic that we produce as a result, the worse climate change will become. Plastic releases greenhouse gases at every single stage of its life cycle, as I like to call it, from production to degradation. So in fact, researchers have estimated that 850 million tons of greenhouse gases are released into the atmosphere in just 1 year of producing and incinerating plastic alone. So these emissions are expected to rise as plastic is continuing to grow in popularity. So in every point of a piece of plastic's life cycle, as I like to call it, impacts a community of color. So the photo of the left was taken by Brian Paris in 2018. It overlooks a community in Houston, Texas. And the flare that you see coming in that photo is coming from a refinery called the Valero Refinery. So these types of refineries are creating plastic pellets that are used to make plastic bags and other plastic products. And on the right, you'll see a resident of St. James Parish, also known as Cancer Alley, who is opposed to Formosa Plastics, a company that wanted to build a plastics factory right in their own very community. So when I talk about the lifestyle of plastics, again, there's like an impact on every single step. There's someone who's harmed with their health or their well-being. So we can talk about from a variety of aspects. Consumers, we can see that like a lot of environmental justice areas, the areas that are low income and typically BIPOC, they can't go to a place that has access to like super zero waste stores. As like Amber was saying, a lot of these kind of like zero waste systems are placed in really rich communities and they're not given access to other communities who honestly are being treated the worst from all the impacts of plastic production and disposal. So when we talk about like what's the actual solution, there's a lot of solutions that we can think of. First of all, we need to just start thinking of like, we're not going to just like phase it out, you know what I mean? Like we have to just stop producing and using single-use plastic. Of course, that is very naive to say that today we're just going to stop using single-use plastic. It is everywhere and our society depends on it at this point. So we do need to kind of transition away from it and figure out how we can build a system that is good for everyone and very sustainable. And we need to focus on the petrochemical facilities and ending the extraction of fossil fuels, making producers responsible and adopting and enforcing ambitious targets to reduce our emissions as a nation. So thank you all so much. You are welcome to join Plastic Free Gen Z if you are a Gen Z activist. So you can contact me, that's my email, and all are welcome. Our Instagram is just one word, Plastic Free Gen Z, if you want to check us out. Thank you. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Eva. That was a great presentation. I don't know if you all want to put your contacts in the chat, just to share with everyone. I'll leave this up for a second. And yeah, so now we can all have a little time for a Q&A. Welcome everyone to put their questions in the chat, and I'll be reviewing. Stacy's going to be sharing those questions with me. I'm going to stop sharing this and we'll start. I think I'll try and go in order of questions for Amber first. So if we have any questions for Amber, you're welcome to put them in the chat. And if you're interested in saying them out loud, if you feel like it's easier, just raise your hand and I'll call on you as well. All right, so I had a question for Amber. Yeah, I was just curious to know, like, what are some strategies for bridging the gap between underprivileged communities? And do you feel like when you do reach out to these underprivileged communities, are they receptive of joining these organizations, environmental organizations, and getting involved?
I think if I could sort of like expand on that more, a big misconception when it comes to people of color is that they don't care about the environmental movement, but that's like a really big misconception because statistics show that on average Latinx people and Black people care a lot more about the environment than white people. I think it's like 49% for white people, and then it's like 57% for Black people, and then up to like 69% for Latinx people. But the reason why we don't see representation of these people in the environmental movement is because of racism. So like if we are going to like make the movement more inclusive, and we need to make an active effort to like include them in our conversations, I don't really think it's like an issue of like I think the question phrase, or like maybe I interpreted it weirdly, it was like, how do we get them to like join our organizations? It's really just like making your organizations more inclusive and diverse, and like making an active effort to reach out to people of underprivileged communities, because of course they want to join into the environmental movement. They care more about it. They're affected primarily by climate change too. They just like haven't been given a seat on the table, and that's a seat on the table in which privileged people need to step back and make sure that they have it so their voices can be empowered.
Great, thanks for that. That was very clear. All right, so this question is from Pamela. I believe this is for Amber. So it says, all three have you reached out to your local cities about SB 1383 and how to have the youth help the community events?
I think this question was directed like at all three of us. So as a Recyclesmart intern, I was working to help like my school implement SB 1383. So that was kind of like the volunteer bin monitoring system, making training like educating the student body and training staff on proper sorting. So that was one thing we did. And yeah, I'd love to do more about SB 1383 because I know a lot of people there's a lot more work to do in educating people about proper waste sorting.
Great. Sounds like Pamela would love to connect and learn more. Anybody else have anything they'd like to share?
Yeah, I was also working on SB 1383. I was with my city, and so I'm this youth intern for my city council, and they are trying to implement in elementary schools as well because it's the law now. I think the problem is a lot of people don't realize it's in law now. Like people are just thinking, oh, it's just like something that was happening, but it's going to be a law starting January, and it's a pretty big deal. I think it's really cool. So it's not only focusing on reducing waste, but also like reallocating like, food that wasn't eaten, for example, to give to other communities that may need the food. So we're just making it a little more sustainable. Pretty cool.
Great, thanks. All right, I have one more question for Amber. This is from Dorian. Could you explain the term eco-fascist more in depth?
So eco-fascism is an ideology in which overpopulation is presented as an issue, and a lot of this rhetoric, whether like very blatantly eco-fascist or sort of like subtle, infiltrates a lot of the climate movement. And it's sort of this idea that like the best way to solve the climate crisis would be to have less people on this planet. So with Sorry, wait, sorry. So I'm trying to think about like a really good way to explain it. Like eco-fascism, the ideology is like sort of like related to eugenicism, in which like we want less people on this planet to help mitigate the climate crisis, and it's like an ideology that can manifest in eco-terrorism, both in Auckland, New Zealand, like Christchurch, New Zealand shooting, and also the El Paso, Texas shooting were informed by eco-fascist ideologies. But eco-fascist ideologies, which I feel like are more explained by example, can also manifest in, for example, someone saying that we need to have less people on this planet, or like someone maybe unknowingly saying, oh, we should like expand birth control to these countries, even though birth control is something really important that should be expanded. Like saying that in the context of climate change really borders on eco-fascist territory, because ultimately the populations you're controlling are people of color.
Heard that loud and clear. Thank you, Amber. All right, so this next question is for Devin, from Stacy. What was your experience coordinating with elected officials for the ordinance, and in what ways were you involved throughout the 7-month process?
Yeah, so it started out in January, where I attended a public forum session with several people from my environmental club. And during the public forum session, we just gave a speech, each of us, about why polystyrene is bad, the precedents of polystyrene regulations, and like what an ordinance for Orinda would look like. So during a public forum session, it's kind of just, it's open to the community, and the council members aren't allowed to really directly talk about it. So what happened after that is that I had to meet separately with the mayor and city planner for them, and they wanted to endorse my plan. So what they did is they took the idea and put it on the agenda as an action item. And once that was the case, the city council members voted on that action item. And then we were able to start like attending the actual city council meetings. Like the public forum session is like this part at the beginning of city council meetings that's just open to the public. And so we were able to get into the actual city council meeting, and our ordinance became kind of like an official agenda item that was talked about during the meeting. So after that first city council meeting I attended several more, just talking about like polystyrene, and also I think some of the details of the ordinance. So then let's see. Oh yeah, so it was kind of a while ago, but once the ordinance got like not passed, but the city council voted to pursue the ordinance, I helped with the drafting. So the city lawyer was in charge of actually drafting the ordinance, but my environmental club and I were allowed to kind of give ideas. And so we kind of attended meetings and explained what we thought should go into the ordinance. And I took a lot of inspiration from a Contra Costa County ordinance banning polystyrene for unincorporated communities. And so I was saying things like we should target food vendors, and also the retail sale of polystyrene in grocery stores and things like that. So once the drafting process kind of took place and the city council adopted the ordinance, we were kind of, that's when we kind of, took a step back, because we were mainly doing the advocacy work and also some of the initial ideas for the drafting process.
Great, thanks for that. All right, I'd like to call on some folks that have their hand raised. Can I start with Mason Rowe? Go ahead.
So it's okay if I unmute?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Thank you. First off, I'd like to thank all three of you. All three of your presentations respectively were awesome, and just great stuff that needs to be heard. And I was just thinking I could zero in on Devin. So I heard in your presentation that you have implemented like extra recycling bins, compost bins, so on and so forth in your own school, trying to get those respective waste streams taken care of. And so I'm just curious about how you managed to do that, who you talked to, how you kind of implemented that. Because right now I'm trying to do something similar, not to steal your thunder or take credit or whatever, but I'm trying to do something similar, and it's a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare because there's not enough people, not enough time, et cetera, et cetera. So I was just wondering how you did that.
Yeah, so I got a lot of help from Recyclesmart. So Nancy Deming, who I think is in this call, is part of Recyclesmart, and she helped a lot with like the just like having the bins on campus and just with the implementation of the project. So I don't know where you're located. Do you mind telling me like where you are in California, or just like
Woodland, California, so north of Davis, if you're familiar with that. Or
okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if is that in Contra Costa County?
That's in Yolo County.
Okay, well, I guess I can just explain how I implemented the volunteer bin monitoring project for my school. What I did is that I reached out to my leadership class. We have like this leadership class on campus, and they're in charge of doing a lot of different things on campus. Then I also reached out to volunteering clubs to like get volunteers. And the only thing like bureaucratic things I had to do was like talking with the custodians to set up bin stations. So like grouping the bins like compost, landfill, and recycling together. That way it's easy to monitor. And then also setting up a way to like a way for volunteers to sign up for shifts. And for that, I use signupgenius.com. And it's a really nice way. It's free, and anyone can go on there and just sign up for shifts. And then I use the Helper app, which is like this volunteer hour tracking app. And that's where the volunteers could input their hours and earn credit for what they're doing. So I would be happy to help you. I can put in my contact information, and I can just share all these materials that I developed to enact this volunteer bin monitoring system with you, because it's actually pretty straightforward. And I know sometimes like it can be difficult to get volunteers, but starting small works out pretty well. And then once people like start getting aware of like volunteer opportunity, a lot more people are going to participate. So I would love to reach out to you and tell you how I did it.
Thank you. And once again to Amber and Eva, thank you again for your presentations as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. And next, I'd like to call on Devin Jackson. Devin, go ahead and unmute yourself if you want.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So my question was connected with what would each of you say to a middle schooler, or what would you say to your middle school self to get, or like, if you could go back in time and talk to a middle schooler, what would you say?
Amber, you want to start with that?
What would I say to a middle schooler? To like my middle school self, I really just like don't know what I'd say. Like I feel like everything's just like a process. Like I wouldn't want to like make myself feel a different way. I don't know. Like I think where I got now, like regardless of like any perspective shift, like that's just not something I would have been capable of in middle school. So I think just like staying with like the way things go, I guess. Ava, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I would say like, I think just like starting, like just being like, I was, always like unsure of like, oh, Dad, do I know enough about plastic pollution? Do I know enough about climate change to like start my own organization? but you have to just start. You have to start, because you can't think that way. You can't think like, oh, I don't know as much as like this person or this person, because you learn along the way. And all it takes is to just like learn about it. If you're interested in this issue and if you're passionate about how this is impacting people, then there will be no problem in learning about it and starting. And if you have certain skills, like Amber likes to write. So Amber, you know, she can like use that skill to try to find her place in the movement. And I really like, I'm a dancer, so I like performing and I like being on stage and I like working with people to choreograph a dance. So that was something that I kind of use. Like I love doing presentations and I love talking to people about the issue. So you just kind of have to find your place in the movement and then just run with it.
Yeah, and I know Devin Jackson is a middle school teacher at Foothill Middle School, and he's in charge of like the environmental club there, and he's empowered his students a lot to take action against environmental problems. And so if I could talk to my middle school self, I mean, one thing I'd tell him was to not reuse that plastic fork, because that was a really bad idea. Just use a reusable metal utensil. And another thing I would tell him is to just like look at things like small and like small picture. A lot of times we have this big picture idea of, oh, wow, these climate change, plastic pollution, these are super large issues. How do I tackle this problem? So starting out small. So for me, that was trying to encourage others to bring reusable bags to the grocery store, use only or try to like use reusable things like that. And then that kind of moved on to like a stepping stone, like the individual and then the community and things like that. So just kind of focusing on one small problem and how you can fix it and just letting that lead you to greater and bigger things.
Wow, great job, presenters. Thanks so much. This was a really great session. Really appreciated all your presentations, some great questions from the audience, attendees. I hope you really got a lot out of everything. It looks like some folks are interested in everyone's contacts. Maybe if you want to, presenters, if you want to drop your contacts in the chat. And I know that on the website, the Zero Waste Youth website, it has a bio of all of the presenters and some of their contacts at least. So you can always check in there if you don't get them here. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone for attending the Convergence, for attending this session. I hope you all really enjoyed. So looking forward to the rest of the day.
Could I add something real quick before we leave?
Yeah, please.
So Ava and I are both youth ambassadors for Plastic Pollution Coalition, and so we've been working really hard on Plastic Pollution Coalition's Youth Ambassador campaign for COP26. So we've compiled a list of 10 calls to action that we want to see out of the decision makers of COP26. And I'm gonna put the link in the chat. It's a petition, so please sign on or just like read it to just get an idea of what, the youth like working in the environmental movement really want to see out of COP26. I'm gonna put it in right now. Also, it was in partnership with Ben Von Wong, who is an incredible artist who shines light on plastic pollution. So if you want to check out his work too and his specific campaign, that'd be cool. That's the calls to action and petition. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Amber. And if everyone wants to, you're welcome to turn your videos on and just give a little gratitude for the presenters. Yeah, it was really, really great. Very inspiring. Appreciate it.
Thank you everyone for coming. As I said, I attended this Convergence last year, and the speakers then inspired me to take action. So it just feels fitting that I can hopefully inspire you to take action. So thank you for coming, and I hope you go out there and just try to create change in your community.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's so cool to be here. Yeah, really cool energy. I like it. All right.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Well, I hope everyone has nice lunches, good breaks, maybe get up, stretch a little bit, get ready for the afternoon sessions.
All right. Thank you.
Take care, y'all. Thank you all.
Excellent job, presenters.